kör ändå på engelska, va? För det ska spelas in
Ja,
och så.
ja, precis. Jag håller på. Jag vet inte om du spelade in, men jag satte igång recording precis. Så att,
Ja, du har gjort det. Okej.
ja.
All
Men,
right. Welcome, guys. We have a few people here.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, and just so you know that this will be recorded, so if you don't want your face or anything on video, you can just turn it off. But I think otherwise, Lina would love to see your faces since we aren't that many people here. And yeah, welcome from Dandy People and Agile20Reflect Festival. And I'm giving the word to Lina now.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. So yeah, my name is Lina, and I am a UX psychologist at a firm in Gothenburg called Layer 10. So I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more in a bit, but I'm really happy to be here today, this morning with you guys. And we're going to talk about group dynamics, group development. And I'm just going to dive into it, I think. And we talked about questions. So if you have questions along the way, please just ask them either just by putting on your mic and asking them, or writing in the chat. Maybe Patrick, you can keep an eye on the chat for me because I won't see it.
Yeah, I'll have an eye on the chat.
And there's also, let's see where they put that now. There is the raise hand feature. If you click on reactions at the bottom, you can also raise your hand if you want to raise your hand before you get the word. So yeah, and we're also going to have some discussion in the middle of the session. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so the eternal question, are you seeing my screen now? Yeah, all right, awesome. So yeah, I'm Lina. I'm a psychologist who studies psychology in Lund in Sweden, and then I worked for a few years in education as an educational psychologist. And I think that's also where that was the first time when I discovered what it's like to be in a really high functioning team, actually. It was my first job after university. I got a job as an educational psychologist in a small municipality called Hylte in Sweden. Maybe someone knows where it is. It's in Halland. And we were working there as a central student care team. So we served all the 8 schools in this municipality. And we were a really tight-knit team of different people. And we had, in our office, we had, our office used to be a regular apartment before. So there was a room that used to be the kitchen. And in the kitchen, there was, a kitchen table that was still there from when the offices were apartments. And I think sometimes that kitchen table, where we had many of our discussions, where we had our lunches and coffee, but also where we had many of our discussions as a team, that kitchen table was sort of like an extra team member, because that room really somehow facilitated for us to come together as a group and to have these discussions and dive into things together and find solutions together. So sometimes a kitchen table can also be a useful member of your group. Important point. But yeah, and so I was an educational psychologist, and then I ran my own firm for a few years as a consultant, did lectures and workshops and processes for different companies, and wrote some books. And then after doing that for a few years, I felt that, well, being on your own is fun, is challenging, but it can also get a bit lonely. So I wanted to get back into find employment somewhere where I can also find sort of a sense of coherence and have colleagues again and people to work together with and be a part of something bigger than just my own firm with just me. And that's when I stumbled on this field called UX, user experience, which I guess all of you know what it is. And I thought that, well, as a psychologist and a person who also has a lifelong love and passion for tech, maybe there is an intersection there between psychology and tech, and maybe that is the UX field, and maybe there is a room for me in the UX field somehow. And so I found this firm in Gothenburg, Layer 10, and I asked them if they were willing to hire me as Sweden's first UX psychologist. And after some consideration, they were. So I started there in April last year, which is also just in the beginning of the pandemic, obviously. So it's been a very interesting ride for me so far. And just a little bit, I of course always often get the question, okay, so what is a UX psychologist? What does a UX psychologist do? And my way to explain it, I would like to show you before we dive into the other material, just this pyramid. I call it the pyramid of design. And I like to think of how when you work with digital services and digital products and you create digital solutions, we often focus very much, of course, on the products or the services that we're designing. But sometimes we don't really think about, well, maybe we also need to consider how we're organized. Or maybe we also want to consider even bigger pictures, like what kind of society do we want to build? What kind of future for our children do we want to contribute to while building these products and services that we're building? So for me, this pyramid of design is kind of a mental model of how from the very broad perspectives of society and larger systems to the very, very specific details of what we're designing, the nitty gritty, should the button be this color or this color, and how all these things are connected and are part of something bigger. So basically, my job is to help companies weave all these levels together and see, what kind of impact could their products and services have on society? What impact do they want to have? How do they need to be organized in order to have that impact? So basically, that is.
I have a
Yes.
question for you, Lina.
Yes.
As if for your customers, if you
Yes.
do generalized view, on which of these do you find the most customers? Is it system design, or is it much, okay, we need to design this product, or where are your customer based mostly, or where they're?
Well, what I would say is that first of all, I'm still quite new to this field, so I'm still doing quite a lot of different things and narrowing down what's to find sort of a niche within this. But I would say that a lot of companies, obviously, they are very focused on their products or their service. And some companies, but maybe not many, are also considering the organizational perspective. And if you look at a startup, for example, they're usually very, very focused on, okay, we have this new idea, we have this new product, we want to get it out to the market, and we really need to grind it out and focus on getting the product right. And you don't maybe always take the time to consider organizational issues, for example, like how should we be organized, or what kind of vision do we want to have for this company. It's more about, okay, we have a product and we need to get it out. And then if you look at the larger, like the system, the societal impact, I think that's coming more and more. I think that's something we've seen for quite a while now with the value-driven company. You want to contribute, and you want to be sustainable, and you want to work with CSR and these kind of things. But there still is in many companies a discrepancy between saying you want, a better world and contribute to humanity and all these kind of things that sound pretty, and actually doing them and actually incorporating those values into your everyday operations. So I think there's work to be done on all these levels in a lot of companies. I don't know if that
Okay.
answered your question,
Yeah,
but that's
it did. So we
yeah.
have another very interesting question from Maru
Hmm?
here in the chat as well. And nice to see you again today, Maru. Was there a pull demand for you as a UX psychologist, or did you sell yourself to companies to introduce this role?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I mean, right now it's still me and my company, figuring out how to get me into other companies basically and help them. But we can definitely see, I mean, obviously I can see that there is a need for this, and it is also part of a larger trend that psychology and tech, they are merging together. We can see in the US, for example, that both psychologists just like me and others are entering the UX and the tech fields to contribute with their knowledge. We see the big tech companies in the US hiring psychologists to make them, to help make their services more in tune with user needs and these kind of things. And also we see the other way around, that people who are work with UX and development and come from maybe a UX or graphical design background, that they want to study psychology now because they want to understand the users even better. So these fields are really, getting even closer together. So I think that I'm in a sort of a intersection or overlap between two fields that will become much more intertwined in the coming years.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions for me before we dive into the other stuff? And of course, you can just keep asking me also along the way. But today, what we're going to talk about is group development. So we're going to talk, I've divided this talk into a few different sections. So first, we're going to go through the stages of Wheelan's group development model. And some of you might have read about this or heard this before. But I think this is something that really everyone who works in a team, be it an Agile team or some other team, this is something that is very helpful to have an understanding of, because it explains a lot of what goes on in teams. To understand this model. And we're going to look briefly at some keys to effective teamwork. And then we're also going to look a little bit about, okay, so how can we sort of create the soil where teams can thrive and grow? What do we need for that? And as I mentioned, please ask questions along the way. All right. So first, we're going to go through the stages of the Susan Wheelan group development model. And I found this, Susan Wheelan is a psychologist. She passed away in 2019, and she had been working on group dynamics basically her whole career for like 40 years. So she's really a giant in this field. And she's also, I found, quite an anonymous person. She doesn't even have a Wikipedia page, which actually, yeah, I thought that was a bit strange. So I might create that later. But I did find one quote from her, which I thought was kind of cute. She once said, most groups contain people who are trying to do a good job. They may not know how, they may not be socially skilled, but they are trying. And this is kind of a good summary of her group development model. That's throughout all these development stages that a group goes through when they're forming, people are generally trying to do their best, and sometimes things, processes can get in the way of that. But the more we understand what a group goes through to become a high-performing team, the quicker we can get there, and the quicker we can work through the obstacles that we can anticipate will get in our way. So she has created a model of group development, and it basically has 4 or 5 stages, depending on how you look at it. And we're going to go through all these stages and look at them more in depth. But the short version is that these stages are when a new team or group is put together. The first phase is, okay, so who are we? And then when you come to the next phase, you start asking, okay, so what are we doing here? And why are we doing it? And then you move on to, okay, so, but now we decided what we're going to do and why, how are we going to do it? And then when you actually get to the 4th stage, when you're a high-performing team, that's when you actually do the work in a high-performing way. And then sometimes for some teams, there is also a 5th phase called journeying, which is, for example, if you are a project group and you know that, well, this project is going to run for 1 year and then the group will be dismembered. So sometimes a group is dissolved at the end, for example, of a project that's time-based. But not all teams obviously have this adjourning phase, because teams tend to live on over time. So let's look a little bit out on these different phases. So the first phase, that's when you have a new group that have just come together and started forming. And this phase is also called forming, and that's when everyone is new to each other. And that's also when a group is, when group members tend to be very polite discussions tend to be very little about work and more about pleasantries and non-threatening subjects. And the group is usually quite cautious in this stage and don't really want to get into the work stuff, because once you get into the work stuff, then you need to start negotiating, and there might even be some conflict about what to do. So it's easier to just talk about what did everyone do this weekend, or how are your kids, and talk about these sort of non-threatening things. And at this stage, also group members don't want to be perceived as different, so it's a lot of conformity, a lot of finding common ground and being agreeable with each other. And there's also a big the group puts a lot of faith in their leader. So if you have a leader at this stage, the leader tends to need to be kind of direct and pointing, like, okay, now we're going to do this and you're going to do that, and be like hold the structure for the group, because the group can't really hold the structured by themselves, and the group is kind of testing the way forward and like tiptoeing forward in a very very cautious way. And so there's not a lot of work being done in this stage, because that's still a little threatening to the new fragile group. And there's also a lot of like escaping behavior, like when you talk about irrelevant things or do things that are not really related to work. And there is also there is a risk in this stage that if you are going to assign roles to the group, to team members in this phase, that the group will assign roles based on stereotypes, or just based on, okay, who raised their hand first, or just dole out roles without really considering who is actually the most suited for what. So this is something that we get back to that, but roles that are assigned in the first stage might need to be renegotiated later, because you might find out along the way that, well, maybe this role didn't actually suit me that well. Maybe I would do a better job in this role, for example. And it's also quite possible to get stuck in this stage for a very long time. Not all groups, I mean, there are different stages, but there is not a set progression that, oh, a group always stays in this phase for so many months and then they always move on to this phase or whatever. So it's quite possible that a group just stays in this phase and never gets out of it. And of course, that also depends on how often does a group meet, and how does the leadership look, and other factors as well. How is the organization also supporting the group? And the role of the leader in this stage is to sort of mitigate the anxiety and help the group to like, okay, it's fine, we're going to get through this. Here's some structure. Here's what you're going to do, and sort of be very like hands-on leadership. Give positive feedback, give room for discussions, and also offering training and supervision and coaching, helping the team to grow and get along and develop. And it's also a good time to establish from the leader, to establish high performing norms, and to establish what is expected in terms of performance norms in the group. And at this phase, the leader also needs to be the interface between the group and the rest of the organization. So give the group room to grow and to get to know each other and come together. And then hopefully, if you've been here for a while, then you move on to phase 2, which is called so the leadership needs to be sturdy and supportive and direct. And when you move on to phase 2, this phase is called storming. And in the storming phase, that's when you have started to get to know each other a little bit. And that also means that you can start feeling comfortable enough to challenge each other a little bit, and sometimes a lot. So this is when people start to, okay, but yeah, I said in the beginning that I was on board with all of these things, but now I feel like it should tell you that I don't really agree with this thing we decided over here. I think we should do this instead. And this is actually a good sign when you come to this phase, because that means that now there is a level of trust, so that team members can actually express themselves more openly and say what they really think. But that can also then, of course, lead to some more conflict, because people are disagreeing over matters, for example. And it's a time of conflict to come together around values for the group. And these value conflicts could also be a source of energy, because now you can get into discussing things that you're actually passionate about. And it can sound maybe sometimes harsh, and it can sound like you're fighting, but it can also be that you're actually passionately discussing and ironing out, what kind of values does this group want to have? What do we want to stand for? What do we want to do? What is our why? And there is, a lot of negotiation. And also you can see in the stage that team members might try to separate themselves. Like in the first phase is a lot about unity and coming together and being agreeable and consensus. And in this phase, when people feel more comfortable, they can also start to distance themselves a little bit and say, well, you all think that, I don't think that, I'm my own person. And sort of, I think there was also someone who did an analogy between these group stages and the human development. So this is the teenage phase, if you would analogize that to, if the first phase is when you're a child or a baby, you need a lot of care. And then here is when you start to separate yourself, and distance yourself and become your own person. So the teenage phase. And this is also a phase where the team might start challenging the leader, because in the beginning, the team was looking to the leader for structure and kind of clear guidance and leadership. But now when they feel more comfortable, they can also start to say, hey, we're not going to do everything you say. We have our own thoughts now, and we're going to do some things our own way. So the leader in this phase will need to gradually start sort of stepping back, because if the leader tries to continue to be very rigid and like micromanage in this phase, that might create a conflict, because the group doesn't feel that they need that anymore. They want to, I can do it myself. So, and this is also a phase to clarify the roles and make them even more suitable to each person's competence and what the project actually needs. And this is also a good phase to put into words like how has everyone interpreted the goals and the task, because in the beginning it can be so much focus on consensus that people say, yeah, we're all clear about what we're going to do, right? But then when you get into this phase, you can start to sort of, but are we going to do this, or I thought maybe it was this, and then you can start to really define what is actually the goal and what are actually the tasks that we're going to do, and we can discuss them in a more open and productive way. And so this is the phase where the team members test each other, and they test the trust of the group, and they sort of sketch out the outline of the group, like what is this group going to be. And so this is a phase for clarifying the goals and to getting on board with what we're going to do. And yes, the leader needs to gradually back off from their mandate and take a slightly more laid back, or take a step back to let the group form themselves. And then if you get to the next phase after that, that is called norming. And that's when you've gone from first being this cautious group where it's a lot of consensus, and then sort of negotiating and a little bit of conflict, maybe even to get everyone on board on what are we actually going to do. Are we all on board on the tasks and the values? And then when you feel that you are all on board, then you can start thinking, okay, now we've decided what we're going to do and why. So now we can start talking more about, okay, so how are we going to do that? We can talk even more about the roles and even better fine tune who is going to do what. And there, when you come to this phase, there's usually an increased maturity and security in the group. And it's like you feel like, okay, but now we know where we have each other, and now we all know, we're all agreed on what we're going to do. And when you come to this phase, it's also possible to start creating subgroups in the team or group. Because if you start with that too early, then that could just separate the group. But when you come to this phase, now the group is ready to assign, okay, so you two guys can go do that over here, and then we can do this over here, and then we'll meet again, and then we'll put it together later. So there's trust and there's clarity, so that the team can be split up in subgroups if that's needed for something. And this is also a phase when you can start to decide even further on the norms and the sort of code of conduct in the group, because now you've gotten to know each other, and now it's not just about finding consensus in everything, but it's about, okay, but can we, when we disagree on something, how do we handle that? When we have a conflict, how can we handle that? What kind of norms do we want to have in this group that are actually productive and that are gives everyone space to contribute, but also sets up some reasonable boundaries for the group. And this is also a phase where team members tend to be like, they give feedback that is not about people, but about, you know, the task or the work being done. So you can like focus more on the actual work and talking about that and giving feedback and being constructive and being critical when needed, and have constructive talks about the work you're doing. And this is when the group is more, if they were sketching the outlines of themselves in the last phase, this is where the group is even more designing itself and assigning roles and finding a way to, okay, how can we be the most productive? What is the best use of all the competences we have here? And this is also a phase for the leader to take an even further step back and to also empower the group members to be sort of self-leaders and say, okay, well, now you guys have come a long way, so let's, I'm gonna just step a little bit further back. You know where I am, you know where you can find me if you need me, and I will coach you, but I'm not going to micromanage you and give you super clear structure now, because now you can figure most of this out on your own. And yeah, was there a question in the chat, or just saw some flashing thing? Or comment? No, okay. And yeah, so now the leader takes even further step back and hands it over to the group to lead themselves most of the time. And then hopefully you can come to the last phase, the sort of peak phase, which is then called performing. And this is actually when you are a high performing team, and when you do when you can do really awesome work, when you know each other, you have ironed out your differences, you have assigned roles, you're clear on the values, you're clear on the goals, you're clear on the tasks, and you can really get down to it and get work done. So this is a work phase where there's usually a high sense of trust, high sense of security in the team. When you know each other, you can rely on each other. You have norms that state how team members should act and perform, and people adhere to the norms, and they challenge each other and make each other better and call each other out even on some behaviors, for example, because there is that level of trust. And we're going to get back to that later, but I can just mention that if you look at, for example, communication, when you're in this phase, you spend about 80% of the time talking about work, and then about 20% of the time talking about, you know, sort of maintenance or social stuff that is not about work, but that is also needed to keep the group sort of coherent and keep everyone happy and keeping the spirits up, basically. And so the leadership in this phase is now the leader is really more of a coach who the group is doing a lot of the work by themselves, and the leader is there to support them and also to give them, if they need support from the rest of the organization, the leader can be the interface in that. And the leader is more of a member of the group themselves, like one of the experts among the other experts in the group. So the leader is should at this point need to be very little hands-on and give very little structure, and leave it up to the team to organize themselves in the way that they see fit. And also, of course, the leader in this phase can still keep an eye on the group processes and watch for if there is regression, for example, if the group reverts back to an earlier stage, which, for example, can happen under stress, but also if a new team member comes in, or if big changes happen, the group can sort of revert, just like a person can regress if we're stressed or things happen to us. We can like act like we're younger than we are to sort of find comfort in that. So yeah, so this is the phase, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but this is the phase where groups ideally would be. And if you look at agile teams and teams in workplaces in general, a common misunderstanding is that this is where all teams are at all times, and this is where teams get if you put 5 people in a room and call them a team. But as we've just seen, becoming a team from just putting people together, it's quite a journey and can take a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy, a lot of emotion, and also not all teams even make it here. We're going to get back to that in a little bit. And as I mentioned, in some cases, there's also this fifth phase called adjourning, and that is when the whole team is dissolved. For example, if a project is finished and then that there's no need for this group anymore, they have done their job and the project is over. And this is also, in these cases, this is also a phase to sort of consider and not just say, okay, bye, see you, never again. But because this can also be an emotional time when a team, for example, if a team have been working closely together for maybe years and then they're adjourning and dissolving, then there could be a sense of separation and loss, and people will, miss each other and they will miss having that contact that they've maybe had. So this is also a phase to consider if you are part of a team that you know beforehand is going to be dissolved at some point because a project is going to end or something. Then you might need to think about how can we manage this? Can we do something to make this sort of transition better for everyone? And so what I found also, maybe you guys are familiar with this. This is the double diamond that we use in UX, for example, from design thinking. And I found a kind of funny thing that you can also basically put the Susan Wheelan's group development phases in this model as well. So in the beginning, you're forming, you're very together, everyone's coming together, a lot of consensus. And then you can start diverging in the storming phase, and you can start going different ways and distancing each other and finding your positions in the group. And then when you've done that, you come together again and start forming your norms about, okay, how are we going to do our work? Now we have established who everyone is and what we're going to do and what our values are, and now let's get on track to start doing the work. And then when you start doing the work, then once again you can there is room for subgroups, for example, or spreading out, or people can work on different things and still come together when needed. And then sometimes there's also the adjourning phase when the group is dissolved. So that's also in kind of a mnemonic to remember how these different groups, what they look like or how they are. And there has been, of course, Susan Wheelan worked on this model for 40 years. So she's done a lot of research, but also others have done, there's tons of research on this model and how it interacts with performance, for example, in different ways. And just to give you some examples of what research has shown about group development is that when you come to the fourth phase, the performing phase, if you are a customer service group, you give better customer service, you're rated higher by customers. If you are in a stage 4 group, you also work faster and more efficient. There's been studies in hospitals, for example, firefighters, many different vocations that stage 4 groups, they work faster and more efficient. They earn higher profits. Some studies have shown that in some circumstances. And when you look at firefighters and healthcare personnel, you can see that stage 4 groups save more lives because they are more efficient. They know each other. They have a communication that's can be very rapid. They know how to have a chain of command, and they can save more lives compared to groups in more sort of lower stages of group development. And students, if you divide students into groups, research has shown that student teams that reach the fourth stage, they get higher grades if they study together and work together. They get higher grades than groups that get stuck in the lower, earlier stages of group development, for example. So there is, in short, there's a lot to be won to really work on these group processes and try to get a team, a newly formed team, to go through all these stages and come to, ideally, to the fourth phase. And so the kicker here is that only about 23% of all teams ever gets to stage 4. So there, if you're in team right now, there's an 80-20 chance that your team is not in that phase, sadly. And there's many reasons to that, of course, and going through all these motions and establishing all these contracts about roles and tasks and values, it's a lot of work, and it's work that there's not always neither time nor skill nor energy or resources for when you're on when you're in a high-paced business environment. But we should keep in mind that not all teams, actually most teams, never reach this phase. And we're going to talk a little bit later, of course, about what we can do to increase our chances to get to this stage. But I think this is something to keep in mind. And I think I thought of this, maybe I didn't mention, I'm also a certified Scrum Master. I haven't actually worked that much as that, but I have the paper. And when I was reading articles about Agile teams and Scrum and these kind of things, I found an article where someone just mentioned, basically in passing, that it is implied that teams, Scrum teams, for example, are high-performing teams in a later stage of group development. And as we can see, in 80%, about 80% of the time, that is not the case, because a team, just because you put people in a room and call them a team, they won't automatically get to the fourth stage without quite a lot of work and quite a lot of effort and mindful work to actually get them there. So now I think we should have a little bit of discussion, and we're not a huge group, so we can just have the discussion all together here, I think. And so I would like to discuss with you guys, have you ever been part of a truly high-performing team? And if you have, how was that? What signified the work of your team? So take a moment, just think to yourself, and then we can just discuss a little bit. Okay? I'm going to take a sip of my coffee. Does anyone want to share an experience?
I can.
Yes.
I'm Alexandra, working as a Scrum Master from time to time, and I've really had the blessing and enjoyed working in high-performing teams. But as you've mentioned, it needed a lot of emotion, focus, and work together. And I will say that it's rich when all the team members are on the same way to build a team. And something that I can say that in that stage, everything is very easy to be done. There is more creativity, more challenges toward the product that we were developing, toward each other. And as you've mentioned, sometimes even fun parts turn out to be talking about work. But the fifth phase is very, I will say, very emotional in that stage, because high performing teams just don't like to separate. So we've had a lot of discussion when we needed to move to different projects and wrap it up in some nice way, but it's really a difficult phase. And from my experience, even I can say maybe the most demanding, because in that period, everybody just finds a way to stay a bit longer with that team, to do some documentation, cleaning of the code, or whatever needs to be done, or it's just small pieces of work. But I really had the pleasure to work with such teams, and I can say that from my perspective, it's a complete team achievement.
Yeah, and that's something that I've encountered a few times coming in as a psychologist into the tech field, is that I mean, naturally, if you have a company and you have employees and you regard your employees as assets, of course, you hire them for their talent and for their skill and for their competence, everything they know. But what I think not all companies always know or think of or remember is that if you have a team that have made it all the way to the fourth stage, who are a really high performing team, that is also a huge asset. And so when a company says, okay, well, we have this team and they've been working together for about a year and they're doing really great, but now we need Sophia here to go do this other thing because she's so good at that programming language or whatever. So we're going to smash this team up and we're going to put people here, here, and here. And then I think to themselves, oh God, no, please don't, because you're ruining a huge asset, because they have put effort and time into building this cohesiveness in the team, and they are so high performing, and smashing the team just because you need that person over here and that person over there. I mean, of course, sometimes that will happen as well, but that should really be considered. That is it really worth it to dissolve this team, or could we just take the whole team and make them do something together, because that would likely be much better than just taking one or two people out of the team, because then they would have to start over with new people. So that's a takeaway, that if you have a high performing team, do what you can to not dissolve them if it's possible, because that is a huge resource you have there.
We have another question from the chat as well, Lina, from Dominic. Do you have some results from research or observation how long it takes to have a team become a high-performing team?
Yes, there is. I mean, as mentioned, there are so many factors that can affect this, of course, and a lot of teams never make it all the way, and they get stuck. And it also depends on, if you're a team at work and you work together every day, it can go faster than if you are, for example, an organization where you're a board who meets once a month, obviously. So how often you meet can, for example, affect it. But there is, I might actually do a little cheat sheet thing now and see if I don't have it here, but I can look that up a little bit later. There is, I know in Susan Wheelan's book, she has there is a rough timeline that they've seen from research, but I would say just from the top of my mind that on average, roughly a year to go through all the stages and get to the fourth stage. And of course, again, a lot of factors. It would depend on a lot of factors, but in the scale of months and years rather than weeks. That's there is research on that. I can get more sources if you want later.
And is that just for being a group or team for a year, or is that with working with them to have like the mindset, okay, we want to become a high performing team?
Well, I mean, obviously a team doesn't necessarily go through all these stages automatically if you just put them in a room together. And obviously the more careful input, I mean, the more you know about this and the more you actually, for example, as a leader, the more you can orchestrate this from the beginning, the faster it can go, because then okay, now we're here in this phase and we can expect that these things will happen, and let's just be nice for a little bit and get to know each other. There's no rush. And then we're probably going to bump into a phase where we're going to be more in conflict, and that's also fine, because that's part of life, that's part of this process. So let's handle it this way. And so the more prepared you are, the more you can work with it, but the more you can also, as a leader and as a group, proactively, of course, say, okay, now we should probably talk about this, and now we should probably clarify our goals. Now we should probably talk about roles. So like the more effort you put into it, the faster and the easier it could be.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you don't put,
because some people just think that, oh, we've been a team for X amount of months or something, so we must be high performing, but that's not the way it works. Now I have a lot of questions here in the chat. I'm gonna take them one on one. Here's one. In which ways can the Wheelan group development model be used in team coaching?
Well, I would say that, I mean, it depends on what you mean by team coaching, but if you are going to coach a team over time, then obviously I think it would be a good thing to sort of keep an eye on, at in what phase roughly is this team right now, because they will have different needs in different stages of the group development process. So familiarizing yourself with this model, I'm gonna go get a book in a little bit that I have that it's really Susan Wheelan has a really good book called Creating High Performing Teams, which is very like hands-on with like checklists and tick boxes and stuff where you can really hands-on work with this with the team. But I think understanding this model and gauging, okay, where about is this group now? Are they just forming? Have they been together for months or years? What kind of obstacles might they be facing? I think that could make it easier, both as you're coaching them, because you as a coach can sort of anticipate what they're going through, but also you can help it explain to them, because that's a large part of getting through like rough patches is actually just understanding what is happening right now. Why is it happening? Because the more you can form an understanding and make that coherent to yourself, then it will feel okay. But now I understand why we're fighting so much right now. It's probably because we're not finished with setting these things, for example.
Yeah. So there's 3 more questions in the chat, but I'm going to ask you if do you want to take them in the end if there's room, or do you want to take them now? And because I don't know how much you have left of the presentation.
Yeah, it's I have quite a lot left.
Yeah.
As usual. So maybe we can save them for the end. I'm going to go through this last part quite quickly, I think.
And maybe
so
they get answers to the questions during your
that's also
presentation.
Possible. Yeah. And I can also stay a little bit after 11 if someone wants to hang on and do questions. But yeah, I'm about halfway through the presentation. So I'm gonna, this is usually how it is. So I'm gonna just dive into the second part. And just look at some keys to effective teamwork. And this is also, once again, I'm going to find a link to this book recommended by Susan Wheelan, but there are some key things that you can, that a lot of teams, a lot of companies very rarely talk about, because we're also focused on the daily operations, and we're also focused on, okay, what's happening today, who emailed today, who am I going to call today, what do we need to get done today, and we don't always take the time to work with ourselves as a group or talk about these things. But talking about goals, clarifying what are the goals, are we all on board on the goals? You'd be amazed how often teams or companies aren't in agreement of goals. They think they are, but they have never talked about it. So they just assume everyone has the same image of the goals as themselves. Roles, obviously, who is expected to do what. We're going to also go through all these now. Communication, how do we communicate, and what is the content of our communication? How does that differ between groups in different stages? And also a little bit about conflict, of course. And so if you start about goals, one thing to consider is, well, first of all, are we all on the same page of what the goals actually are? Are there any goal conflicts? Are we approaching different goals that might be in conflict with each other? It might even cancel each other out. And also we can consider, are there open goals and hidden goals? Like, for example, do we say that, oh, our goal is to make a greener world, but our hidden goal is that we just want to make a lot of money? I mean, there's tons of examples, of course, obviously in business, where you're pursuing different goals, and they are some you are open with to the public, and some you're not, and some you are in agreement with your group, and some goals you may not be in agreement with. So some goals you may not even have talked about. You just assume that everyone knew that we were doing this thing or pursuing this goal, but you never actually thought about it. So taking some time to actually talk about the goals and clarifying and becoming on the same page about the goals, and also discussing sometimes these ethically and tricky questions about what do we say our goals are and what are our goals really, and is there a conflict there and how can we mitigate that? It's very useful to get everyone to on board on the same page what's happening. And then about roles, this is also, of course, something I find very interesting as a psychologist. So we have a lot of roles when we go through life, when we come to work and in other places. And one way to think about roles is that we have, when I'm in a team, for example, I might have an expected role, which is what others expect me to do, what they expect that I will be doing. And then I have a preferred role, which is what I think that I should be doing. And then I have a performed role, which is what I actually do. And of course, ideally, these three are all the same. Like what I do is what I think I should be doing, and it's also what other people are expecting I should be doing. But again, a lot of times, these are not in coherence with each other. So a lot of times, for example, we are doing something, but other people are expecting us to do something else and do other things. And they also expect us to know this, but we don't because we never talked about expectations. And so we keep doing things, and they keep, being like, "Why are you doing that? Why are you doing this thing that I think you should be doing?" And then you say, "What? Because we never talked about me doing what you're suggesting. I thought I was going to do this." So once again, having these conversations, and not just once, but having these over and over with your team, and talking about, okay, what is expected of me? What do I expect of you guys? Are we all on the same page on this? Is it clear? Is it reasonable? And does it match what we actually have the capacity to do? Because that's also, I think today, when you look at job ads, for example, you have expectations that one person should perform like 11 people's work. That's one of those conflicts when there is an expectation of you to do very many things that are not reasonable or viable for one person to do. So discussing what are our expectations of ourselves and of each other, and are we all aligned on that? That's also a conversation that can save you a lot of misunderstanding and conflicts going forward. And defining roles, as I mentioned before, this is usually something that can happen in the first stage where people don't know each other, and roles are assigned on stereotype or on, like, okay, you do that, fine, everyone has a role now, good, we can go. And then when you come to the second or even the third stage, that is a good time to renegotiate and go back to the roles and say, okay, well, I was assigned this role, but I think I would do a much better job if this was my role because I'm really better at this. So actually to see that everyone is assigned the role that actually suits their preferences and skills and competence. And so also a little bit about communication. This is also a table from that Susan Wheelan book as well, which I found very interesting because there is research, of course, about how the content of the communication of groups in these different phases. And so talk about the work and the actual task, that is very low in the beginning. The first two phases, that's around 40% of the time. It's that what you're talking about, as mentioned, because talking about the work is also potentially opening up to conflict, because then we also need to decide things and negotiate things. And then when you progress, you start focusing over to talking more and more about the actual work. And in the fourth phase, you talk about almost 80% of the time, you talk about actual work. And conflicts, research has shown that that's quite low, but it does start a little higher, then it goes lower and lower the more you progress. And I mean, as we all know, conflict, even if it doesn't always take up much time, it can take up much energy, because it can, I mean, we don't like conflict, most of us. But the conflict also declines over time in groups. And here's also an interesting one I found, the escape. So like when you talk about, what did you do this weekend? You talk about things that are completely unrelated, or talking about things that you can't affect, or things that have nothing to do with the work and aren't really that social either, but just like escaping from the situation by talking about unrelated things. That is a third of the time almost in the first phases, because you want to do as much as you can to avoid going into the work talk, and then that declines. So when you're a high performing team, you're only in escape mode about 3% of the time. So you're very focused.
Lina,
Yes.
we have a question here about these numbers. Are they
Yes.
recent, and in which industry are they from? Do you know?
I can look that up in a little bit. They're quite recent. This book is not that old, and I'm guessing that that's from a range of different industries, but I can check that later.
Yes, thank you.
But this is, yeah. And dependency, that's also quite low. That's also can also be, talking about things that oh, we can't do this right now because we're waiting for such and such, or we can't do this now because some other factor that we can't affect is making us wait. But that's also something that declines over time and is the lowest or lower towards the end than in the beginning. And also quite funny that support, the social positive feedback and social support talk, that is quite constant throughout the whole life cycle of a group. So really what shifts is that when you get to the high performing phase, you're talking a lot more about work and you spend way less time in sort of escape that's not contributing to the social connection. So this is also something to watch for. And if you're coaching, for example, you can talk about, what is the communication looking like, and how can the group work with that, and how are the group, have they established norms for what to do when people get off way too far on a tangent, and to get back to actually talking about productive work stuff, for example. And just a few, we have so little time now, sorry. But just a few words about conflicts. This is also something that Susan Wheelan points out, that, I mean, there are tons of sources of conflicts in a team or in a company, but there is one thing that she says that, well, if everyone in the world understood this, we would have a lot less conflicts probably. And this is something that's called, in psychology, we call it the fundamental attribution error. Which is basically that as humans, we tend to think that when something goes wrong for myself, then that's because of outside factors that I didn't have control over. And when something goes well for me, that's because of I'm such a good person, or I knew so much about this stuff. Or so if I'm at school, if I take a test, and if I ace the test, I was like, yeah, but it's because I studied so hard, and because I know the matter. And if I fail the test, it was like, yeah, but that's because it was raining and the dog ate my homework. And so we have these different ways to explain success and failure in ourselves. And then we tend to, as humans, to view other people the opposite way. So when someone else has a success, then we tend to ascribe that to external factors, like, yeah, well, that's because they have rich parents, or because it was sunny out, or external factors that weren't within them. And when other people fail, then we ascribe that to their personal, that's because that person is lazy, or didn't know enough, or didn't study hard enough, or something. So we have this sort of opposite way of measuring ourselves versus others. So Susan Wheelan means that if we could keep this in mind and cut each other some slack, and try to think that everyone is usually doing their best, and sometimes that doesn't work out, but people usually have good intentions, and we also personally sometimes things go well because of good factors in ourselves, but sometimes it's also outside factors and luck that make things happen for us. And the same when things go bad, they can be of course a mixture of what I did and what outside factors contributed to. So that's also something to just to keep in mind, that this is a human error that we all are very prone to do. And so when there's a conflict, usually one good rule of thumb for any conflict is, okay, but could we find, if there are two parties that have differing views, is there a way somehow to find a mutually satisfying solution, so that the one doesn't have to give in completely to the other, or vice versa, but a sort of middle ground where both parties feel like, okay, well, I can live with this this remedies my concerns. This is a mutually satisfying solution. Okay, so now we have 0 minutes left and I still have a few more slides. So I'm just gonna go through them. I think they're just a couple of them super quickly, and then we can do a few questions in the end. Is that okay? Yeah, I'm gonna, okay. So just super quickly, what is the sort of soil that teams need to grow, or what can you do as a group and as a team member to help your team grow and thrive? And well, what research has shown, 6 keys for a group to be effective, this sort of soil that they need, the circumstances that they need to have to become a high-performing team, is that they need to have meaningful tasks. We're going to get back to that in a little bit. They need to have variety and challenge, so that the work you're doing is in the sweet spot between not too easy, not too hard, but challenging, so that you feel you want to strive forward. It's also, if possible, it's ideal if a group can work with an entire project from start to finish, because the more parts of the project you have control over, the more coherent you can make it, and the more you can make all parts work together. And of course, this is not always possible, but if it is possible, giving a team as large chunk as possible of a project is ideal. And also, as you know, for example, if you're into Scrum, a team should have the least possible number of members, because you come to a point when more members will actually, cost more in sort of group process cost than it will contribute. So somewhere around, like 3 to 9 people, this as small as possible to get the work done is ideal, so that you don't have extra group members, because that can take resources if you're too many. And a team should have norms that encourage quality and effectiveness, and the team should all work to uphold these norms and hold each other accountable on them. And there is also a plus if a team has been a successful team before, or if members have been parts of successful high-performing teams before. Because research has shown that makes it slightly easier to get back there again. And as an individual team member, what you can do is basically help the team to work towards these, to work with these things. So you can encourage the clarification of roles and tasks. So if you feel like, well, guys, we haven't really talked about the goals here, or I think we need to talk a little bit more about roles, because it's not clear to me exactly how we've divided this and if this is the ideal way. So let's talk about it. And also, of course, encouraging an open communication structure. So for example, if you're a team, how can you find a platform where you can all communicate with each other, rather than communication having to go through one person, for example? Because if you have, the more everyone can communicate with everyone, the faster or easier the flow of information will be. And also finding a balance, contributing to finding this balance between, okay, so we need to talk about work, obviously, a lot of the time, but not 100% of the time. We also need to do some social stuff and like just bond and have coffee and talk about other things. So keeping this sort of balance between work and social communication. And effective problem solving and decision making, we didn't really have time to touch on that. So just leave that. And once again, encourage and follow productive norms in the group. Follow them yourself and hold your other teammates accountable when people are not living up to the norms that you guys have decided. And strive towards unity and cohesion. Like, contribute what you can to make the group feel coherent and contribute with group spirits and unity and problem solving, conflict resolution. Getting people on the same page, facing the challenges together. And I'm going to skip over this because we basically talked about that. And I just want to really, really quickly mention this model from psychology. It's and it's over 11 now, so if anyone needs to go, it's fine to go. I'm sorry, I've taken more time than I had. But what everyone, individual or team, what we as people all need, if we all boil it down to a few common factors that we all need to feel good. And this is also backed by decades of research. 3 factors basically that we need to have a sense of coherence, to have physical and mental health. And those 3 parts are: we need to feel comprehensibility. So we need to understand what is happening around us. We need to understand what's happening at work. And that's also why we need to talk about tasks and goals and roles. We need things to be to feel like, okay, I understand what's going on here. I understand what the expectations are on me. And we need our work and our life to feel manageable. We need to feel that we have the resources to meet the demands put on us, so that the work we have is manageable, at least in the grand scale, even if it's not in every detail. And the most important factor of all, research has shown, for physical and mental well-being, is that we need our life to feel meaningful. We need to feel that we are part of something bigger, but we are contributing to something, that we're guided by some sort of value or some higher purpose or meaning than just a daily grind. So that's also something to keep in mind. And it's also something to sometimes touch back on if your team is in a sort of slump. And okay, but guys, let's remind ourselves, why are we doing this? Who are we doing this for? What is the bigger picture here? What are we part of with this? And find the energy in that to push forward. And with that, I just conclude with a quote. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I say thank you very much. I will still be here for questions for a little bit if anyone has questions. And I also want to say thank you so much for being here today, and hope to see you again sometime. And also you can connect with me on LinkedIn. So yeah, thank you very much. And
Thank
now
you, Lina.
we can take some questions.
Thank you so much. It was really interesting and really, really nice to have you here.
Thank you.
So I think we all could have stayed like an hour longer or something because it was so interesting. I just have a question, and then I go to some of the questions in the chat. When you said how to create high-performing teams, you said there was it's easier or it goes faster if the team members have been part of high-performing teams before. So is there a hack or group development hack if you break up an existing, like if there's been a high performing team that's existed a long time, and instead of just starting a new one, you break up that team and put them into new teams, so those teams goes faster in the development?
Well, you mean if you have a team and you break them up to 2 smaller teams, for example?
No, if you have one high performing team and maybe you want to have more high performing teams, instead of just letting them be and starting 2 new teams, breaking up the first one into small, and then, like, for example, if it's a team of 6, you break them up in 3 and 3 and then add 3 new people, so the old like high performers to teach the other ones how to become high performers in a faster way.
Yeah. Theoretically, that could maybe help a little bit, because you have 2 members that have gone through all these motions, but you would still have to go through all of them
of course,
with the new teams. And it's possible that could go slightly faster, but that also, of course, again, depends on many other factors. So I mean, ideally would be to, if you have established a high performing team, ideally your first question would be, okay, can I just use this team once again for something else? Is there another task, another project that we can just assign back to them so they don't need to split up? Or can we take maybe one member out and add one new one, or like keep as much of the possible of the team intact? So there is, because I mean, how do I explain? Like when you formed a high performing team, you have this sort of currency of trust between you. And that currency does not just transfer to different accounts if you put those people into new teams. I mean, it could help a little bit, but that they can help guide the team, and they can, foresee pitfalls, but they can also, just feel like, okay, but you guys are new people. We don't know you. We don't trust you. And we're going to just start over again. And So it's I think this is one of the points,
There's
is
a lot
that
of,
this sort of glue that builds up between the members in a high performing team, it's also it's there because they are together, and it doesn't easily transfer to other teams just because you take those members, because then the glue is dissolved, sort of. That's not,
yeah.
I know it sounds maybe a little weird, but
No,
you
it
get what
makes
I mean?
sense. Yeah.
Hmm?
And I have some question here. I have a memory that I read that the team may be in multiple phases of the Wheelan's model simultaneously. Is this so? And is
Yeah,
this
I
not
mean,
a, yeah.
obviously, when you have a team, they don't neatly go, first to this phase, and then one day they just skip into the new one, and then the new one. So this is more, of course, a mental model to understand and to see patterns of how group development happens. So yeah, obviously, when at any given time, a team can be performing. Um, uh, Performing as a level 3 team, but they can also still be some fighting from level 2, and so it's more of like, what is the overall, what what are they mostly doing or mostly talking about, and what have they gone through most of these sort of motions. So I mean, the phases don't neatly stack on top of each other or are separated with like boxes, but one thing that happens sometimes is that when, for example, when you're in the beginning, you're a new team, and you believe that, well, everything is going so smoothly, we must have just rolled through the whole thing, and now everyone is working perfectly together because everyone is being nice to each other and sort of helpful, but also cautious, and you haven't really gotten into the nitty-gritty of negotiating the work. So sometimes groups can also sort of believe that they have come further than they have, because they have especially avoided the second phase, when you need to get into at least a little bit of conflict and negotiation. And but yeah, you're not completely in one phase at all times. You have elements of other phases as well. Of course, this is more of a sort of, if you look at the larger pattern, this is the progression that a team makes over time.
Yes. I have two more questions, and then I think we have to let you go, and the viewers as well. So we have this, did you work and have insight on how does the model scale to team of teams? Or is that something you have insight on?
Not specifically. I mean, it's possible, this model is more about the members and how, what are their purpose and how often do they get together. So it's, at least in theory, it's possible that, yeah, a team of teams, if they meet regularly, they can also go through these motions. And of course, we are usually, most of us, we're part of many different teams at any given time, which are in different stages. And you can also be in a company where you are a part of maybe 3 different sorts of teams, and one team is in stage 1, and one team is in stage 3, and one team is somewhere else. So yeah, I mean, theoretically, a team of teams can also just start at the first level and progress through these sort of motions as well. And then that can depend, of course, I mean, how stable is that team? Is that always the same people all the time, or do members come and go a lot? But what the team is doing, the task of I mean, what the team is doing doesn't really matter. It's more about how, how often do they meet, and what is the general purpose of their work.
Yes. And then the last question here. I'm very curious about the decision making and problem solving aspect of a high performing team. Could you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, what I can say is that when you come to a high performing team, what those teams tend to have done is that they have decided how they make decisions. So for example, they might have just found some easy system like dot voting, or voting in general. Like dot voting is a technique where if you have different suggestions and everyone gets a little dot sticker, and you put your sticker on the one you prefer, like, a way of voting. Or other kinds of, how do we make decisions if we are not in agreement? Who has the balancing vote, or how do we decide? Or do we have sort of way to make decisions before we even need to make decisions. So like you decide how to make decisions first, and then you make your decisions, because that also can speed things up. And there's, I mean, maybe you're familiar with the SMART framework used in decision making and goal setting, like specific, measurable, agreed. What was the R again? Relatable.
Yeah,
time
I think
related.
it's relatable. Yeah.
Realistic and
realistic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and time related. So, for example, having rules of thumb like that in the back of our head and say, okay, but are we all in agreement now on what we actually decided? Who is going to do it? When is it going to happen? How do we measure that it's done? So like having these sort of tools decided before you even need to make a decision or solve a problem, that can make your decision making and problem solving even smoother. Or like if you are going to encounter problems, like do we have a method or framework that we have decided beforehand to use for problem solving, then that can make things easier, because then you can follow the framework or the tool, and that can help you get out of very long discussions, for example, because you use the tool to make a decision.
So basically plan for the worst things and have like, okay, what are we going to do now? Instead of just coming up with something when you are in an argument or something. So, okay, what are we going to do now when we have an argument? We do this. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Because the more you can plan those things before they actually happen, the more ready you can be to handle them when they happen. And it doesn't need to, you don't need to think like, oh, we need to prepare for the worst case scenario. It's more about, okay, we are going to have to make decisions in this project, because that's part of all projects. How do we make decisions? Should we have a system? And it can be a very easy system, but just having some sort of system that everyone agrees on can make the process easier when you get there to decide. Because you can also, I mean, if you want to decide on something and you're in a team, you can get stuck in like, okay, but I think this and I think that, and but this is better, and here's my argument and here's your argument, and then you can just get stuck in an argument loop. But if you have some sort of, for example, an easy voting system or whatever, then you can say, okay, guys, now I think we need to do a voting on this, and then you do, and then that will be the final word of it. There is actually also a, well, maybe you guys have read this book or seen it before. There's a book called Sprint. It's about
it's really
design
good.
sprints. It's a method you can use for when you're designing a new, iterating on a new product or service, and you do for 5 days a sprint to get the idea from idea to user testing in 5 days. But even if you're not using a design sprint, there are a lot of tools in here like this, like dot voting or different methods you can use in your everyday life to make decisions in a group or to sketch ideas or things like that. So I really recommend that book just for the methods in it, even if you don't use the whole week thing.
It's Jake Knapp is the author. We had a question in the chat. So.
Yeah,
it's Jake Knapp, and he has a ton of other great books, not just the design sprint. There's also
I think it's backwards now, but yeah.
And many useful ones. Great guy.
And they have a lot of material on YouTube as well. So on Agile Smart that uses their technique. Yeah, exactly. So
I didn't check that out. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna thank Lina and everyone who participated now. I think we could have done this a couple of more hours or something because it was really interesting.
We can do another one.
We will have this up. It will be both on Agile20Reflect archive and on Dandy People Consultants YouTube channel. So thank you so much, and thanks for all the great questions, and thanks for being here, and thanks Lina.
Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
Of course, if anyone wants to talk more about this, just add me on LinkedIn and we can talk more.
Yeah,
okay.
I sent you an email because I'm really interested in this. And my work is very far from psychology, but I'm really interested in this, and so I sent you an email.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Thank you. All right, thank you guys.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.